Do you know that feeling when you're trying to convince your teenagers to tidy up their room? You start on a Monday, you talk with them, nothing happens. Wednesday, nothing happens. But then Friday comes. And you put a Post-it on the door that says, you are not going out until you clean your room. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating because they fundamentally do not want to change. And exactly the same frustration we have had with the OECD. Not because we want them to tidy up their room, but because we have been asking for decades for simplicity, for certainty, and especially for harmonization. And what did we get? We got BEPS, CBC report with a lot of XML schemas all over the world, all different. We got Pillar 1, full of subjectivity. We got Pillar 2, extremely painful. But we didn't get what we were asking for. And recently, the last couple of years, I personally have addressed the OECD asking for a common data model. And I wish I could go to the OECD and put a Post-it on the front door that says, no tax compliance until we build a common data model. I don't think that's going to happen because I'm not planning any trip to Paris soon. But I really hope they would realize that a lot of the issues we are dealing with right now could look totally different if we had a common data model. In 1979, the OECD transfer pricing guidelines were less than 100 pages. And now, based on this paper politics, we have more than 600 pages. Is this sustainable? We were just listening about sustainability. This might have worked for some time, somehow, but this is not sustainable at all. And I have realized things need to change. Let me give you 3 very concrete examples. The first one in my domain, transfer pricing, the narrative-led audit. You prepare your documentation, and probably you think about 20, 30 pages of narrative for the FAR analysis. Everything looks great. The audit comes, you present the local file, they take it, and they come back. And what do they say? I don't believe you. So you think about it, and probably next year you build 20 pages more detailed, more narrative, in order to be able to convince them. They come, they ask for your documentation, and what happens? I think we are going to recharacterize your legal entity into a full-fledged manufacturing company. And your benchmarks are all wrong. We have better benchmarks. It's super interesting to see how taxpayers react to adjustments. Some of them say, OK, these 50 pages didn't work. Let's just put one sentence so that they don't have a lot of questions and we don't confuse them. And they reduce the narrative to nothing. Some others say, OK, this amount of pages were not enough. Let's multiply this by 2 and see how that goes. And very, very few start showing the data. Very few start showing the real data. I will ask you for a couple of minutes to put yourself in the shoes of the tax administration. This might be painful shoes, but just a couple of minutes. If I tell you the legal entity is in charge of research and development, we bear the risk of procurement and raw material prices. We handle legal agreements with banks for loans and cash pool activities. And I can go on and on. Like, why would they believe you? This is just a story. And I could have written anything I want. I'm not showing the data. And that's the difference. If you tell them, here are my 5 employees in research and development, the agreements I have signed with them, their LinkedIn profiles, their academics, this is the data that substantiates that we are bearing those functions. And this is the data that substantiates that we are bearing these risks. We need to shift our mindset. And when we read legislation, think about data. When we write local files, think about what data is allowing you to explain what the legal entity is doing. A lot of that information is already available for them anyway. The second example I have is Tax Administration 3.0, and I mentioned this document in the panel discussion. Page 65 of the document says, these platforms and ecosystems can become agents of the tax administration, facilitating tax just happening. And how? How are we, the providers, going to be able to be in this ecosystem and facilitate tax just happening? With a common data model. So the tax administration is already envisioning that we will work with third parties as taxpayers in an ecosystem, and data is just going to flow. This is already happening in Australia for VAT purposes. They are working with third-party providers. And they are already working in an ecosystem for those purposes. So Tax Administration 3.0 is about sustainability. Sometimes we think nothing is happening from the tax administration side. They are very slow. They are not digitalized. They are not automated. A lot is going on. A lot is going on. And if you want to hear a little bit of it, I will be available in the drinks. But there's a lot going on, not at the base of the multinationals, but exactly the same amount of administrative burden that we have, they need to review. And they are not going to be able to review it by themselves. This will end up in an ecosystem. The third example is Pillar 2 that could have been a very nice data-driven document or policy. But what happened? The OECD started to generate this legislation without thinking, what is the data that the taxpayer has? Where is it? How is it stored? How do you call that piece of information in Germany, and how do you call it in the US? They didn't have a data model, so the whole project was much more complex than what we could have had. And I keep on thinking there must be a better way of doing this. The picture you see here is the how. Teenagers don't want to tidy up their room because they don't have a common understanding with us. They don't understand that if things are in its place, it's going to be much easier for them to find them. If they have things organized, their brain will work much more efficiently. I have realized we are the teenagers waiting for mom and dad OECD to solve our problems. We need to start moving the wheel. We are the ones that need to start working on the basis of a taxonomy to have the data available when we need it for all the topics that we need it. So my last message is how? Years ago, we were discussing totally different topics in these conferences. Now, everything is about technology. The discussions, the vendors outside, and you have the opportunity to make it just happen. We just need to do it. And it doesn't matter who you choose. Just make sure that you have this common data model, this taxonomy as basis, because that will allow you to be sustainable. So just do it. And this is how. Connect your data, identify your data, transform your data, cover all your cross-border transactions in one place. I will be outside if you need any teenager advice.